Welcome to this week's episode of Making Sense of It All. I'm your host, Jesse Stakes. So this week, I have Christopher Wood returning to the show. If you don't remember, he's the senior editor at Thomson Reuters Checkpoint, where they discuss all things payroll related, and he's brought Tiana Neal with him. She's the director of client success at Enhance HCM. If you don't know what HCM stands for, that's Human Capital Management. As you will hear, we're going to discuss some of the topics that are current and relevant to all people that either work or employ people in the United States. Yes, artificial intelligence will rear its head again as facets of it are being implemented by payroll providers and the IRS. We will also talk about some of the legal changes within the Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Service, as well as how companies are trying to attract and retain talent in a very difficult environment to do so. Enjoy the conversation. Let's jump into it. Chris, thanks so much for joining the show again.
Thanks for having me again, Jesse. It's great to be here.
So, Chris, it's been a minute since we spoke. I mean, it's probably been almost 6 months. What's been going on since we last talked?
Yeah, a lot's been going on in the payroll world and industry, and for myself too. Starting in the beginning of this year, I was able to facilitate a study group for certified payroll professionals. This is an exam or a fundamental payroll certification. So it's a test that some people in the payroll industry take, further their skills. It usually helps them move up in the world to management and other things of that nature. And that's for our New York Metropolitan chapter. And then in February, we had an opportunity to speak about worker classification. There's a new rule coming out in the Department of Labor soon, and was able to speak about that to the Orange County, California chapter. Then in March, I got a chance to go to the Payroll Capital Summit. That's in Washington, D.C., and kind of lob data security questions at this very impressive FBI agent who's a director of cybersecurity. Very smart guy. Who was very insightful. And then this April, I was actually asked to join the board at the American Payroll Association, now Payroll Work, for our local New York Metro chapter.
Good. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's been a lot going on, but payroll is a very exciting area. And it's just nice to be involved.
So what does that mean for you? You've joined as being that you're now on the board of directors in as far as the New York payroll organization. What does that look like? What are your responsibilities?
Currently I'm a co-chair. There's a wonderful person who is stepping down at the end of this year. And so the two of us are kind of working together to facilitate that particular role that has to do with education and government affairs, which usually just means outreach to subscribers and members, giving them information about what's going on with the IRS, Department of Labor, and any other payroll-related news that it might benefit from reading.
I know we've said this before when we talked, but it seems like, people who get paid through payroll, they see their payroll check, they see their taxes, but they don't realize until they actually start digging up the tree how that root system just goes so deep within this country. Payroll hits everything.
It does. I agree. I was actually at the APA, well, now Payroll Org. I'll get that right. It's a new merger between the Global Management Payroll Institute and the American Payroll Association. Now they go by Payroll Org. That just happened, I think, within the last few weeks. And at their big event, the Congress, it was in Denver. So that was kind of one of the topics that people talked about, is just how deep and involved payroll is in people's everyday lives. And one of the speakers, I remember he said he calls it payroll is everywhere. That's his kind of concept. And a little while back, maybe a year or two, I wrote this blog post for my company, and that was sort of the concept. I was traveling with my girlfriend. We're going to Miami, and there was a conference down there. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you're going to leave the house, you're going to get your Uber, your Lyft, and is that driver an independent contractor or an employee? When you get to the airport, you board, and you wonder, are the particular flight attendants, what's their status? Are they hourly, they exempt, not exempt. You get to the restaurant, once you check your bags in at the hotel, what is the minimum wage there in that particular area, and any other sort of hourly rules. So really, as you go through your day, you realize it's kind of involved in a little bit of everywhere.
No doubt. We talked about that last time you were on the show, and it's crazy because you got me thinking every time I go on a trip now, or if I go out to dinner, or if I'm driving down the street, you've got me thinking the same way. I've thought, man, I'm like, everybody is touched by this industry. So you're right. It's everywhere. And I don't think that, I don't think you can listen to this and not think about it.
Yeah, I agree. It is. It's something I think, throughout COVID-19 with some of the federal legislation, we may have talked about this in the last time we were chatting, has really brought to the forefront the importance of payroll, because a lot of these tax credits affect these employment tax forms that are filed. And the IRS is dealing with all those credits and processing them and trying to get through it. And employers, in some cases, are waiting for those credits. It's a complicated situation.
No doubt. And I'm sure we're gonna jump into that here real soon. So you brought a friend with you this call, Tiana Neal. Tiana, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for having me, and Chris for allowing Jesse to extend the invite. I'm really happy to be here.
So you work for Enhance HCM. Can you tell my audience what Enhance HCM is?
Yes. Yeah. So we are a consulting firm. We do interim payroll, HR, project management, benefits, tax registration support, all that good stuff for multiple clients as well. So we have a good group of right now, currently about 80 consultants. We are a certified partner of ADP, but we're vendor agnostic. So we work on multiple platforms: ADP, Oracle, UKG, Ceridian, Paylocity, Paycom, you name it. We have consultants with that experience. I oversee half of our consultants. I manage half of them, and then also oversee all client engagements from my end, and then support new intake calls. So if someone resigns last minute with little to no notice, or if your team is at bandwidth and a C-suite executive walks through the door and says, we're implementing a new system and you have no time, you can call on our team and we can step in. We're used to all processes within the system. For many clients, we take on full suite roles, and just really, of course, we get client approval in the end, but we can help set up project plans. We can take the lead on implementing all the modules based on the SOPs for each company. If you don't have an SOP, we can put the SOP together for you and provide best practices and suggestions, optimization as well. And so, we can step in, little to no training. We align consultants that are already versed and knowledgeable in the system. So the only gap would be what a company's internal process is, right? So what your specific deadlines are, which person in accounting do we send the reconciliation reports to, how often are your commissions and bonuses paid, that stuff. But in regards to putting it into the system and making sure, your payroll or your projects are successful, we would already be knowledgeable of that.
So in hearing you just say that, I'm sure you don't work 40 hours a week.
Yeah, many of our
sounds like a lot.
Yeah. Many of our consultants, sometimes I'm like, are you sleeping? How's it going? But we try to best align to make sure people aren't overworking themselves. But people don't realize that many people in the payroll world are workhorses, right? And so there are a lot of things, right? The common thing that I have heard my entire career, because my background is, in payroll and benefits and tax and HR. I've always been from company to company heard that payroll is just a click of a button, right? All you have to do is click the button, right? And it's like,
well, ideally, you want it to be simple, like at least from your client's perspective.
Yes, exactly. But so now being in this role, it's almost every client I talk to, they think that until their person leaves. And so, so it is, very in depth, right? We, if they have someone in place that doesn't realize that something has been taxed wrong, that bonuses have a different taxation, that, hey, look how you're setting up these modules, or if you're moving into a new, company when it comes to becoming more hybrid, COVID heightened that, right? So it definitely, as people started moving and, not realizing that you needed tax IDs to register in new states, or, not realizing that California and New York are not friendly when it comes to certain things like that, right? So just that type of stuff. Those are the knowledge base that our consultants have, that if someone who has worked for a company for 20 years and has been in just one state, they may know everything about that company in one state. But now when you're expanding, there are so many more layers. If you don't keep up with the changes, if you don't keep up with, all the different laws that are coming into play, especially after COVID, it can really become a domino effect, right? And build up over time. So that's the piece that we definitely help with.
Well, and that's where Chris comes into play, because with Thomson Reuters Checkpoint, you're getting all the information that you need.
Yes.
And then you don't have to look in multiple places for it. You can go right to Chris for it, right?
Voila, there you go. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good,
Awesome.
good mention there. Yeah.
So tell me this, like, has payroll always been what you've been passionate about and what you went to school for? Or how did you get into the industry in the first place?
Yeah, so good question. Absolutely not. I would say most people, if you hear their payroll stories, payroll is something that just fell on everyone's plate. For me, I went to college for mass communications. I thought I was going to be immediately like some news anchor on TV or some sort, right? Then I started, and I had like an internship quickly with the news station, and quickly realized I do not want to be a reporter, chasing down people. Kudos to them. I have so much respect for them, but rain, cold, snow, I couldn't deal with it. So anyways, after, college, during that time, I think we were going through a recession a little bit around that time. And so
Sure.
I eventually I got connected with some people that worked at ADP, and they were bringing on a new system. And so I got into their small businesses department, and then the rest was history. I had no clue that was even, something I would be passionate about, but I found my way. I moved in from small business to their major accounts, which is middle market. I then moved into their implementation when the ACA came out for the Obamacare, and helped clients implement that. And then after that, I left and got more experience in, a couple of different companies, fell into HR world, got benefits heavy under my belt, tax under my belt. And now I'm here. So yeah, so it just happened. Life happened. So that's my story.
I tend to believe that things don't just happen. There's a lot of intentional moves that you make along the way that it might feel that it's kind of happenstance that things happen, but it really is the hard work and the knowledge that you gain and everything that puts you where you are today. With Enhance HCM, you mentioned that you guys are vendor agnostic. Does someone out there, does a small business owner out there that's listening to this, do they choose to do business with Enhance HCM, or is it something to where they contract a vendor and then they don't really know it, but the folks that they're talking to are from Enhance HCM?
Great. Great question. So it actually is from both sides. So there could be, like, since we are a certified partner of ADP, our president of the company spent well over 15 years as a sales executive on the ADP side of the house. I mean, he also has many different connections with other HCM vendors. So it could be sales leads that come through where they're on a client side, or received an email from a client and their person just resigned, or they need to implement this module, they need support. They will send that lead over our way. There's other types of situations where people will, go to Google, pull us up, through our website and submit an online submission. Sometimes it's consultants that have other connections with their friends who realize their friends come across a abrupt situation where they need to bring someone in. And so from that stance, we will, they'll send us over the specific lead. It could be clients that were brought in from ADP that have left that company and now gone to another company, and now they bring us in. So, and then just networking in general, right? Just, friends that we know, that hear about the company, sales meetings that, we may go to on-site conferences, just dropping our card, to, certain people, so there's different, areas of how we get our business.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation. So Chris, we talked about doing this as a kind of a follow-up on our first, because there's so much that's happened here in the last 6 months with payroll services and with the payroll industry in general. And I think that the first topic really that I wanted to kind of dive into is something that's hitting almost every industry. And it seems like it's exponentially growing. And some of us wake up and it feels like it's overnight, but it really isn't overnight. And the first thing I'm talking about is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is touching manufacturing, it's touching our education, it's touching payroll services, and it's touching the Internal Revenue Service and how they're looking to collect our taxes and perform their duties here in the near future. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen here in the last 6 months with the rise of artificial intelligence in the payroll industry.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up, and it's certainly a topic that's buzzing, particularly in the payroll industry. When I was at the Congress in Denver, several of the presenters featured AI and talking about it in a positive way, and understanding that some folks have some concerns that, this technology going to replace some of the things I'm doing. One gentleman was talking about how, it is going to change, but it's going to also evolve. And I spoke to another woman who kind of had that same feeling. And I think right now, I think people are looking for where it's going to fit in certain areas. And I guess there's maybe some cautious optimism. There's some concern, as I said. And, the one gentleman said that the role of the payroll professional, he thinks, is going to evolve and change to be a more important role in the business for purposes of saving money, since payroll tends to be, and HR and benefits, they tend to be the biggest expense a company faces, your labor force. So I think from that point of view, it seems like it's a touchy issue. At least that's the feedback I got.
No doubt, absolutely.
Where
anything that creates fear for somebody, anything where there's an unknown, or there's that kind of boogeyman that's behind the closet door that you make bigger in your mind, or it's whatever your greatest fears are. The unknown exponentially makes those worse. So I'm with you. Yeah, it's we got to educate people in order and make them feel comfortable with it if it's something that's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's one of the speakers said something about how AI can help payroll by streaming data management, helping with analysis, offering additional support. I even saw an article. It was on Medium. This is sort of like another one of these apps where people can put publishing various different ways. It's been around for a little bit. And this was back in 2019, and it's touting AI and payroll with management capabilities and calling AI a disruptor in the industry. Now it seems like it's bubbling up quite a bit. And something else I heard from one of the speakers at this event, the APA Payroll Org Congress, was, that it's okay that it's concerning, like you said. It's okay that the change is coming. And he detailed a study that was talking about the kind of future employee and talked about more creativity, more input within the company. And he bullet pointed a handful of other things and kind of paused him and said, hey, doesn't that sound like a payroll professional to you? So I think what he's trying to say is this role is going to keep evolving, keep changing, where maybe some of those day-to-day or manual tasks AI might be able to process. They might need someone at the head of the table when the business is talking about their future, what's their next year look like for profits and things of that nature.
No doubt. Tiana, the IRS is going to start using artificial intelligence as well. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're hearing that the IRS is going to utilize AI for?
Yeah, absolutely. So from what I've seen so far, especially with their recent funding, is that their AI is going to support more electronic proper filing for the forms through the IRS's website. And so from that side, if anyone knows anything about the IRS, they have operated off of a very paper world, right? So very, they don't contact you via phone. You won't typically get an email from them, right? It's usually everything is sent through the mail. And I think what transpired during COVID is that with people not being into the office, right, that caused a huge ruckus for their side. So they did have to get with the program a little bit. And so from our side, I think with their website being updated, becoming a little more digital, I'm thinking their late notices, those may still generate through the mail for some time, but at least the filing process and how their website will look on a go-forward basis will be a little bit more user-friendly, and definitely easier. So if you've ever had to deal with an IRS form and reading all the 100 line items and what each line item means, can be very hard to dissect. And so I feel like AI is going to help assist with that in some way.
I got two questions that pop in my mind, and I'm sure they probably pop into my listeners' mind and into small business owners' mind. Number one, the IRS just hired or just put they earmarked a significant amount of funds to hire over 80,000 more agents, I believe it was.
Yep.
So what are those folks going to do? If they're going to automate a lot of these tasks, why do they need to hire so many more people?
Yeah, so one of the main issues would be the hold times, right, for the IRS and still for each state site. So if you've ever had to try to call, you typically would be on hold for hours. From what I've seen so far in certain reports is that the hold time has dropped to just like 4 to 5 minutes, at least the last article that I heard an update from them. So that is significant because usually you are on hold for hours on end. And then sometimes when you think someone's picking up, you get hung up on, you got to start all over again. So that is adding to their customer service, customer support for faster response times. And then there is still going to be, I think how they've operated over the years, although archaic, I think there is still going to be a layer of a lot of manual forms coming through. So the filing piece of your quarterly quarterly, semi-monthly filings or deposits, semi-monthly deposits, quarterly filings, annual filings. I think that's going to become a little bit easier. But when you have late notices, penalties, and interest, especially the way AI has taken a turn with utilizing people's voices and so forth, they may still need to be cautious around having the IRS contact people via phone, right, via email. I think that there is going to be a layer where notices will still be mailed out, right? And that in return, if it cannot be resolved online, people will have to call in to speak to an actual representative. And I think that's a piece where their hiring is still going to be maintained over the years.
Gotcha. Chris, do you feel like this is a potential for maybe short-term fraud though? Because I mean, you've got, as you just said it, you brought it up, AI is starting to be able to mimic people's voices. I just heard Frank Sinatra sing me a rap song the other day. You've got fraud already with IRS notices that go out. People get phone calls, they get emails, they get fraudulent mail already. So do you think this is going to help with that? Or do you think that there is going to be the potential for additional fraud in additional places where people should fear or at least protect themselves?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question to ask when it comes to AI, because for the good, I think businesses are looking to benefit from it. Maybe there are people with not the best fraudsters, scam artists, and so forth might be thinking of how I can use this AI to continue such scams. And this year, the IRS highlighted the employee retention credit as a scam. They have what they call their dirty dozen. Every year they put out these top 12 scams, and they highlight it usually one piece after the next, one article after the next, talking about these different issues. And the ERC, this was the first time that this scam made the IRS's top. I think it was at the top of the list. And one of the events I attended, a director at the IRS had said to the audience, think twice, because there are certain requirements. I mean, it was for a certain period of time. There's eligibility requirements. If the government needed to shut down so the business couldn't operate, if you had a certain amount of gross receipt loss, you would be eligible to claim this credit against certain taxes, certain employment taxes.
So Chris, let's back up for a second, just because there's going to be some audience members that know exactly what ERC is and some that don't. So for the benefit of the audience, explain what ERC tax credits are, and then also what is the scam?
Yeah, so the ERC, it's a tax credit. It had been available to employers. One of the larger pieces of pandemic legislation that was either in March or April, it might have been the CARES Act, had a provision that put out this tax credit. It's a refundable tax credit against certain employment taxes, equal to a certain percentage of qualified wages paid to employees, and this is part of 2020 and 2021. And so, as I mentioned, to qualify, employer is going to have to be subject to a full or partial government shutdown or suspension of operations. There's also a significant decline in gross receipts. And then as additional pieces of legislation came out, the ERC was expanded and amended a bit. And so there was a couple pieces of legislation. One ended for most employers at the end of the third quarter of 2021 eligibility, but then for the rest of that particular year, startup recovery businesses, which is a different definition, would still be eligible for that credit. So they were able to claim for that last quarter of 2021. What scam looks like is people may have seen these on TV, or if you're flicking through YouTube, you might watching your podcast. There might be an advertisement that pops up saying, you can still claim this money, you can still claim this tax credit, particularly using Form 941X. That's the amended return for employment taxes. And there's a period of time where you can go back and kind of look and say, oh, you know what, I did have this amount of gross receipt loss, or there was a shutdown and I didn't notice it. And these scammers are claiming they can get you funding money from this credit.
Got it. So Tiana, have you guys seen a lot of this? Like, being that you guys are consultants essentially that are, kind of helping out with multiple businesses. Are you seeing this? Have you guys seen these ERC credit scams going on?
During that time, it was really heightened, right? And so there were, I think, the list of people and how much money they received, that was even launched, right? That was even on the website, to my understanding. And so that actually did, I think, for some companies that really weren't struggling, if you really didn't need it, it did look bad from like a PR stance. And then I think from what I'm experiencing here now in my consulting firm is that I manage our whole team that handles the tax audits and tax registration piece. And so for a while, we were, as we provide clients with estimation of hours, right? Tax registration IDs used to not be a long process. And now what we're seeing is that it is a very long process. I had to increase our hours estimations because every state had started buckling down to prevent fraudulent companies from coming through. So instead of just a one-step process, or instead of allowing just an electronic submission online, there were 3-step processes, right? There were additional layers, right, that clients had to go through in order to get an ID number. And so that became, a big issue internally. Calling, states and so forth also became an issue. So from like the IRS's stance, it is really common for someone to immediately see that there's an area for them to get some quick money. And I think during the pandemic, it definitely, the government was just dishing out money because no one had experienced this, right? We all know that, right? It was just almost unheard of. And so people were just getting money. And I think it's calmed down only because certain individuals have been placed in jail, right? You're serving jail time for defrauding. This is the quickest I have ever seen the IRS buckle down. Typically, P&I doesn't come through until years, 5 to 7+ years, because they're so delayed. This is the quickest I've ever seen the IRS really turn around and catch someone early on, right? Just because there were so many fraudulent accounts happening.
I think it's a natural thing, because never before have we ever put $10 trillion out in the marketplace as a country that weren't in existence before. So it's either buckle down and actually catch this stuff, or you've lost it. It's gone. I've heard so many fraudulent scams, whether it was the ERC tax credits, PPP, people setting up companies. And, I'll get on my soapbox for a minute here, because you guys are payroll professionals. The people who did the PPP funds, they actually had the banks handle that stuff. They had bankers looking at 941s and 940s that never looked at them before. They didn't even know what they're looking at, yet they're approving people for funds from the federal government. So there was a whole lot wrong with the last several years. So where there's a lot of money that went out to people who didn't deserve it, who didn't need it. But I think it's one of those things to where I'm glad it's being addressed. I'm glad they're trying to claw back some of it. We probably won't get it all, but I'm glad that it's being discussed, and I'm glad it's being addressed now. Chris, one of the other things that we were going to talk about here is the IRS funding plan. You said that's something that's a very topical right now, and it's going on. Can you tell my audience what the IRS funding plan is and why it should matter to them?
Sure. And there's actually a little bit of a wrinkle in the IRS funding plan with the debt ceiling discussions going on. But ideally, last year, legislation passed, President Biden signed into law, which earmarked about $80 billion in funding to the IRS. And recently, the IRS put out its strategic operating plan. And part of that includes enforcement, part of it's customer service. Tiana was talking about that a little bit. And you were, to your point, they're increasing the amount of agents. They want people to be able to call and not be hung up on, not be put on hold for long periods of time. And new IRS Commissioner Danny Warfel had confirmed, I think what Tiana was saying earlier, hold times have gone down 4 or 5 minutes, which anyone who's called, especially during the pandemic, sometimes you're just sitting there for a long, long time. So I think that
yes, you are.
A lot of the funding is intended to go for. But I was reading a few days ago, debt ceiling conversations, they're looking to cut about 21 billion. So instead of almost 80, it's going to be about 59 billion over a 10-year period. If everything, haven't checked today, I'm not sure if they're still talking it out or if something's been set in stone. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect the number of IRS agents that they're intending to hire. I know they've hired several thousand. So this is a funding plan over a 10-year period of time. And this strategic operating plan kind of lays it all out. One of the things I'm wondering is if they're cutting 21 billion, are they going to take another look and say, okay, maybe the chatbots they were talking about are not going to be as upfront. They may have to make some tougher decisions. Staff.
Sure. Interesting. So, is this like if they can figure out this funding plan, is this going to help with the 941X backlog that they have right now? And you can kind of expound on that for my audience. Tell them what that is and what's going on there.
Absolutely. So, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, Form 941, that's your employment tax form that employers file typically on a quarterly basis. And 941X is simply the amended or corrected return. And typically, you're going to want to file that as soon as you discover an error issue. So what the IRS did was they included claiming these COVID-19 tax credits like the ERC, the deferred Social Security, paid leave, medical wages, all those credits. I think even COBRA premium for a little while. I don't know if it's still on the current form. So anyway, if you need to make a correction or adjustment or amendment, you're going to use Form 941X.
Okay.
The IRS has on its website its mission critical operations, and it shows you all the things that are of the utmost importance, and one of them is processing forms, including these employment tax forms. And we've covered this a few times where if you look, they'll show you the stats. And the last I looked, it was around 2.1 million Forms 941 is in a backlog, and nearly 1 million Forms 941X. Now they have 2 locations, one in Cincinnati and one in Ogden, where they have agents specialized in these credits. But of course, during the tax filing season, all hands on deck, 1040s are
right.
W-2s are out, and so forth. So the Commissioner Warfel was in a meeting, a congressional hearing toward the end of April, and he said now that the filing season is over, it's kind of all hands on deck for these other forms. So I think they are trying to really get to these 941Xs. I think Tiana spoke about this a little bit before with digitizing and scanning these particular forms to kind of speed up the process. Another issue that I've talked to a few people about is Form 941X can only be filed on paper.
Okay.
So it can only be sent in.
Why? What's the reason for that?
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to someone on a different article I wrote too. She's a legal tax expert, and she said that the 1040 is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It kind of gets a lot of the attention, and it probably gets a lot of the funding.
Okay.
She said with the IRS's funding plan, and I think also part with the COVID-19 tax credits, I've heard when Commissioner Warfel is on the Hill speaking with members of Congress or the Senate, like they are bringing this up. Different for both parties are saying, these ERC credits. Some of my constituents are calling me saying, "Well, I've been waiting for a while for this credit." So I think they're aware of this, and they're just trying to, shift and dedicate the right resources to get these things processed. In the meantime, I think the IRS says, don't try to file another form. If you file your forms and you think everything's okay, just hang in there.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Tiana, the Department of Labor is working on changing their worker classification rules.
Yes. So that's always been a heavy topic of discussion. I think there's always, been questions around, is this person really a contractor? Should they be W-2s? I mean, I think from company stance, if you're trying to go through some type of company cost savings, right? At times it is a little bit better to kind of bring in a contractor versus bringing a W-2 employee and taking on, the added benefits costs. But I think from what's, being talked about now, really when the Ubers took over, right, and the Lyfts took over, and when that all started to transpire, it was great in the beginning. It was new. But then as time goes on, right, as workers are starting to demand more, and we are seeing that now where, it is shifting to where instead of employers being the main top priorities, it really is now an employee workforce, from what I can tell, that people are demanding to be, they're demanding to get the benefits that they want and they feel that they deserve. And so I think as we jump on certain bandwagons on certain things and things get popular that we did not even expect would be popular in this day and age, at first it goes good. And then, then the laws start coming into place. And then someone submits, an online submission, to one of the government websites, and then that triggers more talk and conversation, right? I mean, a class action lawsuit only takes two people. So once that starts coming through, right, it becomes very critical. And then the more and more people speak up, which we are seeing now in today's world, that sheds light on a lot. So I think from the classification rules, it really has to be looked at as to, are people able to take, depending on your state, are people able to take certain breaks? Are you allotting that time? I mean, yes, it is certain roles are come and go at your leisure. But if you're truly a contractor, you really shouldn't have a desk, right? Really in an office. And sometimes it's just first, it's courtesy to give someone a desk, right? But then technically is, that's where things become a really thin line. And so it's really like, you really have to know all the rules. And I think, from the DOL, they're just really trying to sort through that. Of course, now everyone's struggling with money, right? So they're trying to hit in any way possible. So they will get you, they will come on site and get you for the littlest of things, but it is, important.
Well, and I feel like it's all, chicken and the egg, whatever you want to say, but it's not that companies are the only ones struggling with money. I think your employers or your people out there, your consumers, they don't have what they need to survive. So it's like everybody's fighting over the same dollars, and everyone's trying to get more, make more, but they're trying to do it on each other's backs. And I feel like it's a vicious circle that we're going in. And so, I think, to your point, I think that all of those things are affecting employer retention and employee retention. And it's, people are having a hard time keeping employees. People are having a hard time creating and continuing to show that value to that employee to stay working somewhere. Chris, what are you seeing there? Are you seeing that improve at all? Or are you seeing that continue to decline? Where are we at with that now?
With regard to employee retention, I think you're
yes,
seeing,
sir.
Yeah, more companies, I think, are trying to get more creative. And Tiana can probably speak to this, I think, with regard to onboarding, training, and all the other things going into getting an employee up to speed for a particular role. And then if they find that they're not happy, it could be the company culture, it could be benefits, it could be any number of reasons. Maybe they had a higher offer, they have to move. You start that process again. That can be a taxing and costly process. And so I think, one of the things, and this is how Tiana and I first met, I was writing an article on earned wage access. She happens to be, in addition to an expert on a lot of other things, this particular topic as well. And this is another benefit that companies are trying to utilize to show that they care about their employees' financial well-being and their future. And they want them to get the education. They want them to be able to use particular funds if they need them a little faster than their paycheck. Maybe it's typically biweekly and so forth.
Tiana, anything you'd add there?
Yes. I mean, employee retention, that's a heavy cost, right? As Chris just alluded to. Once you get someone in that's tenured, I mean, for the life of me, I don't understand sometimes where, hey, look, if you just took care of your current employee, you wouldn't have to put another rec out and interview and then go through a whole, process of training them as they come on board. But look, employees, outside of just costs, right, outside of what their salary is. I mean, benefits are critical. Medical, dental, vision, time off is really critical. All right, holiday pay, although people think it's mandatory, it's really not. And so that is a nice to have. And just, flexibility now. I think COVID heightened that, right? COVID forcing everyone to be at home really forced people to realize, oh, I actually can do my job at home, right? And so I think for 90% of the workforce, that really, came into play. And then as people realized, see, look, I may not want to be in this state. I want to go to a new state. I mean, there were employees in other states and didn't even tell their employer at the time, right? So now that has been shown to the world, it's really been a gift and a curse, right? It's been good to say, hey, look, like for people, as you know, mental health is obviously a big topic too. Like for people's own sanity, right? You may not need to be stuck in an office desk. You may not need to sit through and fight through 30 minutes to an hour traffic every day. And so people have taken light to that, and they really want that flexibility. So now that we're seeing a shift, I mean, at first there were many companies coming out, oh, work from home for forever. Now we're seeing a shift where they're trying to bring people back into the office. And what I see with my firm now is that there are many people that do not want to be in the office. And that's causing resignations, which is in return having them pull in like a firm like mine to bring someone in for a stopgap until they can hire someone. But if you are in a one-off location, not a popular location, but if it's really hard to hire and find a really good person there, I mean, I would say companies need to try to be flexible, right? And there are, unfortunately, there are executives that are used to just how the world was prior to COVID. But don't be the blockbuster, please be, please be up on the times now and try to, move forward appropriately and maybe just be some flexible, couple days in the office, couple days at home, just something, because something that small will go a long way with employees.
No doubt. And hence the rise in AI and chatbots and everything else, because as people leave, there's still a need that they have to fill. So they're looking for alternate ways to fill it. And it's a vicious circle that all of this stuff is interconnected. And the fact that it's interconnected it leads me to my next thing that I wanted to share with my audience. You guys are joining forces. You guys have seen a lot of synergy between the things that you guys do and your knowledge bases. And you guys are actually starting your own podcast to be able to share your knowledge with the world. Share with my audience, if you would, Chris, what's the name of your podcast going to be, and what are you guys going to be about?
Yeah, well, we both come from the HR and human resources and payroll worlds. And so we wanted to kind of capture that. And the name of our podcast is going to be called The Human Role, kind of emphasizing the human resources and the role in payroll. And Absolutely. The concept is to take a deeper dive into the human role of an organization from a human resources and a payroll perspective. As we said before, labor tends to be an organization's biggest expense. How much does it cost for onboarding? Is high turnover hurting the business? There's compliance issues with payroll and tax law and things of that nature. So we want to examine these two important issues and departments in a company and take a look at it from many different angles.
No doubt. Tiana, where can people find you, and when are you guys going to launch your first episode?
Absolutely. So within the coming weeks, definitely, if not by the end of this month, early next month, we will be launching our first episode. It is going to be more focused around AI first, and then we'll get into some other topics after that. But for right now, we will be on LinkedIn, and then also we'll most likely create a YouTube page that's still, in the works at the moment. But we're definitely initially going to start with LinkedIn. And then, as Chris mentioned, once we get into the HR payroll world and topics, I mean, we have a lot of networking connections. We attend a lot of different conferences as well. So we have added insight on what, AI is really going to look like, as it starts being implemented on the HCM systems in the back end. And so those are the discussions we'll kind of bring to the table so people are aware ahead of time.
I feel like it's almost endless. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Oh, I apologize, Jesse. I was just going to add in, something else I think Tiana and I have talked about in leading up to this podcast launch is just how wonderful the human resource and payroll communities are. We talk to lots of folks in these industries. As Tiana said, they've been to multiple different events, and people are very welcoming. They love to talk about this topic. As Tiana said earlier for herself, I have a communications background too. I had an internship at a news station here, and I wanted to be a producer and got into payroll by accident, just by the nature of things. And so I think a lot of people have similar stories where it wasn't their dream job to start, but it became one because they saw how important this role is. And so I think that's something that we connected on and talked about multiple times. And so we're really excited to get this started, and hopefully we'll have some good subject matter guests on in the future too.
Yeah,
No
agree.
doubt.
I just also too, I always like to use a tagline. I mean, to me, payroll is like the redheaded stepchild, right? And we don't bring in the bacon, but we keep the bacon rolling. And no one really, as long as people are getting paid, no one pays attention until something goes into disarray, right? And so it's a thankless job. I could be biased, but I feel like it's a thankless job. And I'm happy that now we've kind of come together. Things have aligned, right, in a way, in an unexpected way. And I'm just excited to really get into more topics, talk about things in more detail, and then, just shed some more light on how, the importance of our industry and how, look, we will make AI be a part of our lives as we're kind of forced to, right? But there is still a human layer that is going to be needed, right? Just no matter what, there's always going to be that human factor to things that are going to be needed and critical for companies and businesses. And that's what we really want to, focus on.
No doubt. And we look forward to hearing about it and listening to your first episode. I want to thank you both for joining me today. Like I said, I feel like, this is a very, very large tree with vast, deep roots. And I look forward to listening to your show as you guys really dive in and uncover each one of these topics that we just dipped our toe in. We just touched the surface on these things, but you guys are going to actually take a deep dive and really identify all the things that are needed for people, what they need to know, and kind of identify what they, give them a resource to where they can learn from it. So I thank you for doing that. And again, thank you guys for joining me. And I look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having us.
So I know that was a lot of information that we packed in, but we really just skimmed the surface of each of those topics. And I would encourage you to dive a little deeper if you're interested. Chris is a great follow on LinkedIn, and he posts a lot of the content that he writes. Tiana and Chris will also be putting out a podcast soon, as we talked about, and they'll deal with topics just like this, so I encourage you to give them a listen. That's going to wrap us up for this week. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll catch you guys next time.